I'm going to talk about some very important points when it comes to parenting children. A very important subject to discuss. There are many parents out there, many kids, and many times these parents have really no guidance. There's really no one who is really telling them what to do properly. Parents, they make the best decision. There's obviously tremendous amount to discuss on this topic and all of the points that need to be made. And especially, where is where are the parents getting their uh, viewpoints from and the ways that they're going to decide to properly raise their children? Where are those views coming from? That's what they have to ask themselves. Zilberstein in his Alim L'Shabeach talks about this a little bit. Say what he says first and then add however much we could at the time allows. Pasuk in this week's Parsha talks about honoring your parents. Ish imo v'aviv tira'u in Yud Tes Gimel. Fearing, honoring your parents. There's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings. So we're going to try to discuss several points. It's a pretty common occurrence that you have families now and they have multiple little children. See, a family has a 4-year-old, 2.5-year-old, a 1-year-old. See it pretty all too often. You see this in a good way. Hashem, great. A lot of children. With a lot of children comes a lot of responsibility.
Hmm. Wait,
And the problem is, well, one of the problems is that sometimes the parents they try to redirect some of their responsibilities to this older child, so to say. Parents got to realize this child's 3.5. Even though that yes, he or she is the oldest child of all of the children, and therefore in many ways is a leader, is higher up, should be looked up to. However, nevertheless, the parents have to realize at the end of the day, this child is only 3 years old. Of these sorts of children have improper expectations, something that is beyond the capabilities of this 3.5-year-old child. That is certainly something to think about, and something that parents have to be cognizant about and realize. A lot of times, parents they want their children to be raised properly. But at the end of the day, parents have to realize at the end of the day that they're just children. And therefore, these children cannot be overloaded with different tasks that they are incapable of performing. Parents have to realize kids are kids and they have to play. Anything that kids are allowed to do, parents have to allow them to do so. Sometimes you see parents, they call them helicopter parents. They're on top of their children for every single little thing, and they don't allow their children to breathe, to do really whatever they want. Similarly, many times parents are too strict on their children, and therefore their children, the kids, were never kids. So now they act like adults when they're kids, and when they're older, then they act like kids. If we allow our kids to be kids when they're younger, then there's a much greater chance that when they get older, they're going to be adults. I'll have to elaborate on that point. And by the way, this equally applies when it comes to grandparents also. Something that I've noticed is a lot of times grandparents, by nature, are 10, 20 years out of dealing with little kids. And therefore, the expectations are totally unacceptable in many ways. And therefore, grandparents also have to be incredibly careful about this, not just kids. Now, without a doubt, this is all coming from a pure place from the parent. After all, they just want what's best for their child, for their children. However, many times they don't realize what's best because, it's a very interesting concept that people they study uh, how to drive. They learn how to drive. They spend hours practicing how to drive. They take the test to drive. And then finally, after, I don't know, maybe 20 hours worth of studying, then they drive and, they're still learning when you're driving. There's always more to learn, right? Where are these courses when it comes to getting married? How many people sit down and take hours and hours with the courses and do hours and hours with the research? I'll tell you, me personally, before I got married, I finished many svarim on marriage, hundreds and hundreds of hours. I read up on it. And this is actually one of the claims, this taina, this claim I saw by Rabbi Arush in the Sefer, The Garden of Peace. They have it translated into multiple languages. It's pretty good, I have to say, pretty thorough. Went through a cover to cover. He makes this point in there. This point could equally be applied to parenting. Most times, first parents, it's a whole discussion, figuring out the gender before, obviously, but they're getting everything prepped before. They're getting the toys, they're getting, everything that you need, the crib for the child. They're getting the bottles, they're getting the diapers, they're getting the etc. Everything they're getting ready. The car seat, of course, you need to leave the hospital. They're getting everything ready. But the one thing that parents aren't really getting ready is how to deal with their kids. They don't know exactly what's expected, and they don't even realize And then this happened even many years after being parenting. There's a lot of questions that come up in many ways, not just how to physically take care of the children, but emotionally, psychologically, how to go about that in the right direction. When a kid comes home after daycare, after school, and they're exhausted. Maybe they're a little hungry. Maybe they're very tired. So they start with the tantrum for no reason. How do you deal with that? These are very lofty concepts that need to be addressed properly and need to be researched on how to go about with this. So he says, we have to realize that even though parents many times want what's best for their children and they try to demonstrate that and act upon that and apply it, but many times it's really not the best decision that they're making in many cases. We have to realize that many times we're involved with certain activities. And sometimes we try to take on ourselves more than we're capable of doing. The Gemara says, "Tefasta meruba, loy tefasta, tefasta muatu tefasta." Sometimes if you try to carry too much, you're not going to carry anything. You're going to drop it all. If you carry a little, you'll be able to carry it. But even something that is within our ability to successfully do, many times we don't even do it. Many times we don't even do it. So, in other words, if we ourselves aren't achieving and accomplishing what we're capable of doing, how could we expect that from a child? So this parent over here, he's saying from the 3.5-year-old kid, "Oh, you're a big kid now. You're a big brother. You're a big sister. You have 2 younger siblings." Yeah, but is it in their capability to do that? Mm-hmm. That's the question that has to be asked. Are you trying to load them up with too much and then they're not going to be able to carry anything? That's the question we have to ask ourselves on step 1 over here. It's a very important point. It's a pretty common occurrence that a child breaks something, right? Child spills something, right? So children, obviously, when they're at a young age, until they're capable, you obviously don't give them the fancy silverware and dishes. You give them plastic. But they insist on not having the sippy cup. They want a big girl cup, a big boy cup. You give them a plastic cup, boom, it spills all over. That's a good Tropicana orange juice. Spilled on the floor, $4 a bottle for that thing. That cup could have cost a half a dollar. How are you gonna react? You gonna yell? No, that is not appropriate to yell. Calm the situation down. You say that's normal. You clean it up and you move on. That's how it is. Obviously, Chachamim B'Roshim. You have to use your head before and not fill the cup up all the way, just a little at a time, and then you keep repouring so that that won't happen. You have to foresee that happening. But these things, they're all normal. Toys spread all over the floor. That is normal. So now you have parents, you have grandparents. They want their kids or grandkids to remain silent and play nicely. What now? You expect that all the toys are going to be, they're going to play with the toys when they're kept in the cubbies where they are, or in our house, we keep them in a big dollhouse, whatever it is, or in the little container things that you have. How are they going to play if the toys aren't out? You expect them to clean the thing up? Yeah, at certain ages, at certain times, they're capable. But that is normal. All of these types of things are all normal. Parents have to be careful about this. Another interesting shaila that could come up. Sometimes you see parents, they're always asking their kids to do things for them, to bring them something. So you'll say, what do you mean? That is very logical. Very logical. Excuse me. Now the parents are enabling their children to do a mitzvah. Mitzvah in this week's parsha. Kivud Avim. Now they're enabling, facilitating, helping out so that their children or grandchildren now fulfill the mitzvah of respecting parents. They ask them to bring them a sefer, a drink, whatever it is. You need to know that this isn't good to do. Parents, grandparents should not do such a thing. Don't ask your kids, not even constantly. We're not even saying don't constantly ask your kids or grandkids to do things for you. Even a little bit. If you're capable of doing it, do it yourself. That's a good attitude in life, by the way. You see by older people, much older. Now, obviously, health is a major factor in this. But you see many times the older people who are healthy, they are very stubborn that they do not want to get helped by anyone. Now, a lot of times you could say, wait, being stubborn is a very bad thing. It's a bad thing to be stubborn, right? But a lot of these people who are very stubborn to get helped, they want to walk on their own, they want to do it on their own, you'll see they're the ones who make it to 100. Now, obviously, there's many different factors involved. Health. I'll tell you, I know of 2 cases in particular that refused any help. There was only a couple month period that, they obviously couldn't do anything towards the end. But other than that, once you start getting the help, you can't get off of the help, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a person is capable of doing something themselves, do it yourself. It's the same thing with the parents and with the grandparents over here. Yoshua Yoshev Zatzal never asked any of his family members to help him. Not even his wife, not his children. Even certain things that were very difficult to do. And even when he was in pain and sick, he strove to the best of his abilities to personally do what needed to be done. He didn't ask anyone. So those parents, grandparents who think that they're being mezakeh, their children and their grandchildren, that there's a zikui, that they're bringing them merit by doing so, not true. The words, please bring something to me or do this for me, were not in Rav Elyashev's vocabulary. Because Rav Elyashev held halachically that this mitzvah of Kivud Avim is not placed on the parents. The parents aren't the people who should see to it that the children are fulfilling this mitzvah properly. That is on the children themselves. The children themselves have to strive to fulfill this mitzvah. Now, there's obviously a way you'll say, wait a second, How then could parents educate their children to fulfill the mitzvah of kibbud avein, of honoring their parents? Very simply. The father tells the children to honor the mother, and the mother tells the children to honor the father. The mother says, "Oh, bring your father a cup of water. Bring him this dessert item that I just made, whatever it is."
Why is that different?
Because you're not saying that it should be done on yourself. You want to educate your children, right? But you don't want to make it a thing that now becomes a selfish activity in any way, right? That's not what it's about. But you still have to educate them. So you tell your children, wait, when your mother walks in the room, stand up for them. That's another discussion, by the way. In this generation, you see less and less children and grandchildren standing for their parents and grandparents. Now, this is a whole halachic topic in and of itself, which would take us a good full session to cover with dozens of sources. But at the end of the day, you have to come onto a leniency and a loophole why the children don't need to stand. AKA, your parent has to explicitly say, don't stand for me. You should know my mother told me, don't stand for me. I still stand for her. Especially at a public event when she comes over to me. Which doesn't happen often, but it could happen.
His parent can't be machal on the cover. Is that it?
No, there's a discussion. They could. That could work. Why would I not want to fill them? So now if a parent says, I'm going to get angry, I'm going to get upset, that's something else. We're not talking about this right now.
Just says like,
yeah, right. No, you don't need, but from the letter of the law, you have to. Something gets discussed later in the Parsha. In Yud Tes Yud, which ties into this, V'karmacha lo yisaylu. People don't know what this mitzvah of oilulais is because they never learned Meseches Peah. You could learn the Daf Yomi 100,000 times, you might not come across oilulais properly because it's in the Mishnayos and Meseches Peah. Oilulais is basically inferior grapes, you could call them, clusters of grapes, and you have to leave those for the poor people. Underdeveloped grapes. So children you can compare them to these oilulais, underdeveloped. The Drash V'Ha'iyun explains, you have to watch these oilulais. So too, these children. You see all too often, unfortunately, parents yelling at their children, saying insults to their children, all sorts of things, chastising them, rebuking them. Now, obviously parents need to rebuke, but look, when 90% of what's coming out of your mouth when you're talking to your children is negative words, that's not a healthy relationship over there. That's not good at all. Parents have to be careful, cautious, not just to mention the negative that the children are doing. Parents have to not only equally, but have to compliment more than they chastise, than they rebuke, than they say negative comments that you're doing bad. You have to encourage. Double the amount of words when it comes to a perspective of rebuking their children versus complimenting their children and encouraging their children. The compliments and the encouragement has to be double the amount of quantity than the negative comments, than the rebuke, than the insults. Just think about that for a minute. How many parents mess up on this? You see all sorts of things. Most times, the rebuke isn't even good because the kids are just tired. They're not listening to anything, and then they're just going to try to do worse. So it's just, it accomplishes, not only does it accomplish nothing, but it makes matters worse many times. A lot of times parents forget about this vital, crucial point over here that we're talking about. A lot of times, teachers, rabbis, moras, they call the parents of the children. Why? They're all calling for the same reason. Your child needs improvement in this area. His behavior is unacceptable. They don't say it that way. They try to maybe sprinkle it up a little bit, dilute their comments. But that's basically why you're calling. End of the day, stop with the fluff, get to the chase. The parents are calling because something is unacceptable in their eyes. Excuse me, not the parents are calling. The teachers are calling. The rabbis are calling. The Morah is calling. Something is unacceptable that's going on. There's a behavioral issue. There's an issue with grades. There's an issue with something. How often do the rabbis, teachers, Morahs call just to say, oh, Nachas call, a good report. I'm just calling because, I just want to let you know your kid's doing great. How often does that happen? Now, certain times there's just a set time that the teachers should just check in and they call the parents anyways, regardless. So then they relay the information. Okay. Talking about an out of a blue phone call. Out of nowhere, they don't have to. You know what I'm saying? I just want to say your kid is doing great. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Be a great idea. A lot of times they just talk about how there's a deterioration. That's a big mistake. Things aren't going good. A child who is constantly getting criticized by a parent, by a teacher, whatever it is, they're gonna become what's the word? Desensitized to it. It's gonna go through one ear out the next. They're not gonna listen to it. It's not gonna do anything. It's empty words. It becomes. It's not gonna be effective we're talking about from a chinuch perspective, a perspective of educating children. However, the parents and the teachers would compliment the children, would encourage them. There's a much greater chance for success that they're going to improve their actions. It's something to think about. Now, don't misunderstand what we're saying. This doesn't mean that the parents, the teachers, shouldn't criticize at all, shouldn't direct them and steer them in the right path when something is happening that is wrong. Sometimes that's the only route. But that is not the only way to educate the children, and many times it is not the effective way of doing so. The compliments, as we said, should be double, and the encouragement should be double than the insults, than the criticizing of there. Basically, you could call it positive criticism, and it's much more effective and pleasant. Let me think about it. Encouragement causes motivation. Those are good 3 words you could put as a bumper sticker. Now everyone likes bumper stickers. Encouragement causes motivation. It fuels the motivation. It's the gas, so to say. It's the electricity. Fuels it. The children to go in the right way. The child will believe, oh, I could be successful. I'm not going to run away from tasks that are placed upon me. Rather, the child says, I'm going to dig deeper to achieve that goal. All people, not just children, they will respond positively if you praise them, if you encourage them, if you compliment them. A little encouragement, a little praise, that act could go a long way, could give them life. A lot of times, even after many years, someone received a good compliment somewhere. He felt good about himself. He'll even remember the place where that happened. If that's true with an adult, certainly on a child that we're still trying to crystallize their situation over here. We're still forming the child, so to say. Instead of looking at the bad actions that the children are doing, look at the good that they're doing. For example, many times children, they get a little wild, a little rowdy, rambunctious. They get loud. And they get a little out of hand. Parents, they jump in No hesitation, with tremendous rezus, and rebuked them. However, when the same children are playing nicely, everyone's doing a great thing. No, parents don't say anything.
Mhm.
Kids are doing inhu bididhu, anan bididun. Kids are doing their thing, we're doing our thing. Leave them alone. You got to throw out the compliment over there. Right? If we would grab this opportunity and tell them good words, that would positively affect them and influence them to continue in this way in the future much more than the rebuke that we give them for not behaving properly. So you won't even need to come to the rebuke. Another example. Here's your shul case. You bring your kid to shul. Obviously, this is a whole discussion of itself. We need a full session on this. You have to cross-reference the Mishnah Berurah and Hilchos Shmona Esrei and Hilchos Purim by Megillah, the Shlah over there. But your kid is at an age that he's able to come with you to shul and sit quietly and behave. One time you bring your kid and he doesn't behave. You expected him to. And you load up the criticism on him. Next time he goes to shul, he behaves. How much you complimented? Did you compliment him double the amount that you criticized before? Because we have that double rule that you have to apply, that we're learning. Utilize that for compliments. Compliment the kid to your wife, to your extended family. Dish it out. In other words, the compliments, words of encouragement, could be 10 times more effective than the actual criticism for something negative that they did. That's the important point to keep in mind at the end of the day. And this will help with improving the child and to influence him for good. So one time, that said a story. His son returned from Cheder and said, "Oh, we're making a siyum on the Mishnayos of Meseches Baba Kama." His wife adorned herself with Shabbos clothing, dressed herself with Shabbos clothing, set the table with all sorts of yummy food, and waited for the son to come home so that they can make a little siyum over there. That's what the child remembers. What do we value in life? That's showing value to something that's important. Child starts talking. Parents are going to be, ooh, yeah, ooh, the wondered. Amazing, Tibor. Right? Everyone starts going crazy. That encourages the child to talk more. The child isn't even saying full words, they're saying a few things. Water, poopy, they're saying a few things. But it encourages the child to do more. What do we see from this? Encouragement works, it's effective. That's what you have to do also when they're older as well. The idea is look at the glass half full as opposed to half empty. That's an important point. Look, these were a lot of points that were made in Children 101, we could say. There's a lot more points to make also. At the end of the day, parents have to realize if they were in the kids' shoes, what would they be doing? They're gonna be there, they're around, they're in the house, they have this. You gotta shake it up. Weather's nice, you gotta get out. Don't put them in a situation that now there's gonna be a high likelihood and chance of failure. Put them in an environment that's gonna be, you're gonna bring them to a fancy place with
Well,
fancy things. What, you expect them not to touch all the things?
oh no, so I was asking